The sky over the city of Nuremberg on April 14, 1561, became the stage for one of the most enigmatic accounts ever recorded in human history. In the early hours of the morning, dozens of citizens witnessed an unusual and disturbing movement above their heads. The scene, documented by Hans Glaser in a woodcut from the time, depicted spheres, crosses, cylinders, and a strange spear-shaped object. The elements appeared to be fighting each other, as if something, or someone, was waging a battle in the skies over Bavaria. The account, distributed in pamphlets throughout the region, sparked panic and speculation in an era when any incomprehensible phenomenon was immediately linked to the divine or the demonic. Despite modern attempts to rationalize the event, the case continues to defy simple explanations. Could it have been just a misinterpretation of an atmospheric phenomenon? Or did that morning reveal something that history tried to silence? A presence that wasn't meant to be noticed, but for some reason exposed itself for too long? What really happened in the skies over Nuremberg? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and allows me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's dive into the video. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to a sound that doesn't belong to the world around you. A distant rumble, something that makes the windows shake slightly. On that morning of April 14, 1561, the residents of Nuremberg didn't find thunder or storms in the sky. They found something that simply didn't make sense. And most impressively, hundreds of people saw the same thing. As the sun began to rise, an unusual movement formed in the city's skies. It wasn't clouds nor shooting stars. Witnesses described metallic spheres, red crosses, and floating tubes, all in motion, as if a battle was being fought above the rooftops, between forms that seemed to have a purpose. How can one explain this in a time when the idea of mechanical flight hadn't even been imagined? One name appears in almost every serious research about the case: Hans Glaser. It was he who, weeks later, produced the woodcut that immortalized the phenomenon. But Glaser didn't draw monsters or religious allegories. He drew what the people said they had seen. And more than that, he portrayed a choreography in the sky. Objects emerged from cylinders, crossed the airspace, collided with each other. Does that sound like an atmospheric phenomenon to you? They were coordinated movements. It wasn't just glows or reflections. The spheres changed direction, chased one another, grouped together. Some crashed to the ground with a bang, releasing smoke. The description is much closer to a technological confrontation than to a light show. And that brings us to the big question. Who, in the 16th century, would be capable of describing aerial behavior with such precision? The most unsettling point of the report isn't even the conflict. It's what came afterward. When everything seemed to be over, the sky revealed one final element: a dark, long structure, stationary, motionless. The so-called Black Spear. Unlike anything that had appeared before, it didn't move. It didn't emit light. It wasn't part of the battle. It was just there watching. But watching what? Many people ignore this detail, but it might be the key to everything. The Black Spear appears after all the other objects vanish. The conflict ends, and it enters the scene. Could it be an observer? A type of probe? Or perhaps a surveillance entity? Glaser doesn't provide answers. He simply places it prominently in the engraving, as if saying, "Pay attention here." And now I ask you, why didn't the population panic when they saw all this? Why wasn't there chaos, religious persecution, or hysteria? Perhaps because they knew they weren't facing something evil or divine, but something unknown. And sometimes the unknown doesn't bring fear. It brings silence, a silence that echoes to this day. Hans Glaser was no prophet. He was a craftsman, someone concerned with visual accuracy. And his work doesn't contain symbolic exaggerations. It's meticulous. The objects are distributed in a way that aligns with the witnesses. And more importantly, each element is where it should be, as if it were part of a real scene, witnessed and recorded. That's not something created from delirium. Many try to explain the event using terms like parhelion or sun halo. But these phenomena, although curious, don't crash to the ground, don't collide, and don't last for an entire hour. What happened in Nuremberg wasn't a light painting. It was a sequence of structured events. Denying it is more comfortable than trying to understand. After all, How do you accept that something so strange happened and was simply brushed aside? Now think with me. How does something of this magnitude disappear from the history books? It's not as if it was an isolated account. What happened that morning marked the collective memory of an entire city. And even so, for centuries, little or nothing was said about it in academic circles. The impression is that this event was erased, or at least pushed into the dark corners of history. But what happened in that sky, with so many human eyes watching, doesn't vanish so easily, especially when the pieces are still there, waiting to be reorganized. And what if it wasn't a celestial warning, but a revelation out of time? Let's go back to that morning in 1561, but this time with a different perspective. Not toward the sky, but toward the one who tried to capture what he saw in it. The name Hans Glaser isn't famous outside academic circles, but it should be, because what he recorded in that woodcut isn't just art, it's evidence. Take a look at the composition. We're not talking about symbolic doodles or religious allegories. Glaser did something rare for his time. He tried to be technical, observant, precisely graphic. Dozens of spheres, crosses, tubes. And they're not scattered randomly. They're aligned, grouped, distributed in a way that feels intentional. You know when someone saw something and is trying hard not to forget any detail? This is that kind of engraving. And then we stop and ask ourselves, was this just medieval creativity? Or an almost clinical effort to record something that completely defied the understanding of the time? Because look at this, there are even those cylinders launching smaller objects. How do you explain that based on the religious beliefs of the era? This isn't symbolism, it's description. Also, notice the positioning of the sun. In the upper right corner, with a face, yes, typical of the iconography of the time, but with a curious detail, it seems to be observing the events. And even stranger, several objects are facing toward it. Could it represent an escape? A point of origin? Or something even more symbolic, as if the sun itself were silently watching everything? In the lower corner, Glaser includes people. Small human figures pointing upward. That's not common in this kind of artwork. Usually, celestial events are the absolute focus. But here, he shows the contrast, the sky in battle, and the humans powerless. Isn't it dramatic? It's as if he wanted to say, they saw it, everyone saw it, and there was nothing they could do but watch. Then comes the most unsettling choice of all, the red crosses. Why crosses? Why that color? In the 16th century, that carried strong symbolic weight, blood, sacrifice, judgment. But these crosses aren't embedded in the ground, nor held in hands. They're floating, and scattered across the scene. It's not hard to imagine that Glaser wanted to convey something beyond a simple religious warning. Perhaps a presence. But the part that stands out the most is the three central cylinders. They're there horizontal, like large containers releasing small spheres. Sound familiar? Because today, in the 21st century, that image is almost identical to modern descriptions of motherships releasing drones or probes. Coincidence? Or are we facing a pattern that's been recorded and ignored? Now get this, the engraving didn't gain notoriety at the time. It was published in a local pamphlet, but soon disappeared from public records. Why? Such a powerful image, so visually striking, and yet shelved for centuries. It only resurfaced much later, quietly archived in the Wikiana collection in Switzerland. Doesn't that sound strange to you? And more, Hans Glaser wasn't an artist of mystical visions. He was a visual chronicler, someone who drew what he saw, advertisements, events, facts. And if he followed that same pattern here, then we've got a problem. Because he didn't draw an angel or a prophecy. He drew machines, aerial, in conflict. Now think with me, if the image is truly a faithful account, then this engraving isn't just a record. It's a remnant, a kind of proof that, yes, something happened. And if it happened, why is no one else talking about it seriously? How many other images like this are sleeping in old archives, waiting for someone to look again, not with religious eyes, nor with modern disdain, but with the right kind of doubt? Every time an event like Nuremberg's comes into discussion, a group appears ready to discredit it. And that wouldn't be a problem if the explanations were consistent. But that's not what we see. The main modern theories about that day try to solve the mystery, like someone slamming a lid on a boiling pot. Rushed, uncomfortable, afraid to look deeper. The most popular of these theories is the atmospheric one. They talk about parhelia, which are optical effects caused by ice crystals reflecting sunlight. And yes, this phenomenon exists. But let's be honest, when was the last time a light reflection fell to the ground in flames or formed into battle lines? Parhelia are beautiful and curious, but static. They don't collide, they don't change direction, and they certainly don't terrify entire cities for an hour. The second explanation is mass hysteria, a tempting idea. A group of people, in a moment of historical tension, interprets a common event as something supernatural. But Nuremberg wasn't an isolated village. It was an urban center with active cultural life. And more importantly, the reports are far too consistent. Different people from different parts of the city saw the same sequence, the same shapes, the same ending. That doesn't sound like hysteria. It sounds like documentation. Then comes the third theory, perhaps the most disconcerting, the symbolic one. The idea that all of this was a metaphor. That Glaser created an image full of meaning to represent political, religious, or social conflicts. But then we have to stop and think. Glaser wasn't an allegorist. He wasn't known for producing visual metaphors. He was a chronicler, a factual illustrator. Why, in this single case, would he have completely changed his style? And if none of these theories fully hold up, what's left? What happens when we discard what's convenient and look at what remains? What remains is the uncomfortable possibility that it was, indeed, an encounter. A real event involving unknown technology, recorded by someone who simply tried to tell what he saw, without understanding what it was. But then comes the heavier question: why does this bother people so much? Why, even today, do so many avoid discussing the case seriously? The answer may lie in the implication. If we accept that in 1561 there was a technological aerial manifestation that didn't originate from humanity, then a lot has to be reconsidered, including the idea that we are alone, including what we consider as evidence. Now notice, this isn't an isolated case. In Basil, just 5 years later, another similar event was recorded: black spheres fighting in the sky. And in Stralsund, in 1665, fishermen saw metallic shapes and shadows crossing the sea. These are reports with similar patterns, compatible descriptions, and one thing in common: all were labeled as illusions. Coincidence, or a collective effort to bury a narrative? There's something you need to know. Events like this aren't usually forgotten. They're hidden. Because when science can't explain and religion doesn't want to confront, the easiest path is to disqualify. To call it a legend, a superstition. But isn't that exactly what we'd do if we wanted no one to pay attention? Here's the irony. Over the centuries, we've created methods to study the sky, mapped stars, sent probes beyond the solar system. And yet, when we look back and find accounts like Nuremberg's, most people turn away. But why? Is it that we don't want answers, or that we're afraid of them? In the end, what happened that morning still divides opinions. But one thing no one can deny: when too many explanations try to silence a story, maybe it's closer to the truth than we imagine. If the Nuremberg case is already strange on its own, what can be said about an almost identical event recorded in another European city, just 5 years later? In 1566, it was Basil's turn in Switzerland to witness its own celestial spectacle. And once again, the sky wasn't just a backdrop. It was a stage. And what unfolded there seemed to follow a script similar to Nuremberg's, but with even stranger nuances. The record came through another illustrated pamphlet, this time by Samuel Coccius. According to the report, on the morning of August 7th, black spheres appeared in the sky. But unlike Nuremberg, they weren't colorful or varied. They were uniform, with an intense dark tone. Witnesses stated that these spheres seemed to strike one another, moving rapidly, as if engaged in an aerial battle. In silence. No smoke, no explosions, just movement. And you know what's most intriguing? The sky that day was clear. No clouds. No recorded weather phenomena. The sphere's movements lasted for hours, with a regularity that frightened even the most skeptical of the time. Just like in Nuremberg, the residents didn't interpret it as something natural. But they also didn't know how to classify it. There was only one certainty: it didn't belong to their world. And here a pattern begins to emerge. Two events in different countries just a few years apart. Similar descriptions. And the most disturbing part: both places are located in a European region marked by ancient trade, religious, and military routes. Coincidence, or a line of specific interest? Is it possible that these regions shared something invisible, a kind of energetic, magnetic, or technological mark? Some recent theories, especially within alternative archaeology, point to the existence of ley lines, trajectories that would connect sacred sites, megalithic structures, and points of energy. According to this line of thought, places like Stonehenge, the Chartres Cathedral, and even pyramids would be aligned with other sensitive points. And guess who appears in these connections? Nuremberg and Basil. Now imagine this. What if these cities weren't chosen at random? What if these locations were already being observed, monitored, or even accessed by those intelligences that, for some reason, decided to manifest visibly during that specific period? 16th century Europe was living through a time of transition between blind faith and rational thought. Could that be the reason for the contact or the warning? It's not just in Europe that we see this. There are records in Asia, the Americas, and the Middle East that follow the same logic. Culturally intense regions with dense spiritual pasts becoming the stage for inexplicable aerial manifestations. In Japan, the Utsuro Bune of 1803 tells of a metallic object emerging from the sea with unknown writing. In Peru, the pre-Incan culture already described mirrors of the sky. These patterns aren't cultural, they're geographical. And then we return to the old question, is all of this coincidence? Or are we facing a network of interconnected events, suggesting a silent observation map of humanity? And if it's the latter, what would these entities be watching? Curiously, the events in Nuremberg and Basel weren't repeated with the same intensity in the centuries that followed. Not in the same way. Which raises another hypothesis. Could that historical period, marked by religious wars and shifting paradigms, have been a kind of contact window? As if something needed to appear, and then vanished once the moment had passed? Today, archaeologists and marginalized scholars, because yes, many of these researchers are still seen as radicals, continue connecting the dots. Literally, using ancient maps, celestial coordinates, and folkloric records to try to uncover whether there is a hidden pattern behind these encounters. And the more they research, the more evident it becomes that Nuremberg wasn't an isolated accident. It was a point in a greater network. Amid the chaos in the skies of Nuremberg, between moving spheres, suspended crosses, and tubes launching smaller objects, there was something that did not participate in the battle. Something that appeared only when everything seemed to be over. A solitary element, silent, and extremely symbolic. Glaser drew it with emphasis, right in the upper center of the engraving. He called it the Black Spear. This structure, unlike all the other objects represented, didn't seem to be part of the confrontation. It didn't move, didn't launch anything, didn't interact. It was just there, still as if observing. And that's exactly what makes it so intriguing. Why would something so strange, with such a distinct appearance, appear at the end of everything? And more importantly, why was it included so deliberately in the visual record of the event? The shape of the Black Spear resembles an elongated capsule, like a spear or a dark mast floating vertically. And the fact that it appeared after the supposed battle opens the door to many interpretations. For some scholars, it could represent a type of observer vehicle, external monitoring that showed up only after the action was over. But why? What would be the role of such an observer? Bolder theories within ufology compare the Black Spear to a type of sentinel or even an autonomous probe. And it's worth remembering here, we're talking about 1561. The idea that something could monitor an aerial battle without becoming involved was inconceivable at the time. Yet that is precisely what Glaser's image shows us. A strange presence that remained distant, but present. And what if it was a form of punishment? That's one of the most disturbing lines of thought to emerge in recent studies. The Black Spear as a final symbol. A weapon of judgment, or a silent warning. It wouldn't need to act. Its mere appearance would indicate that something greater was being watched, that the event wasn't merely accidental, and that perhaps the forces involved were aware of this. Now think with me. If the battle in the sky involved two or more forces, the Black Spear may have been sent by a third. A neutral entity? Or a superior one? Was it there to ensure that certain rules were followed? And if that's the case, then we're not just facing an aerial phenomenon. We're looking at something hierarchical, with levels, with structure, and that changes everything. In symbolic terms, a spear represents direct power. It's an ancient weapon used to pierce, to break, to divide. In classical iconography, spears appear in the hands of gods, angels, and holy warriors. But Glaser does not place it in human hands. It stands alone, vertical, somber, hovering in the sky like a reminder. That doesn't seem random. Many have tried to ignore the black spear in studies about the Nuremberg case. Perhaps because it doesn't fit into simple explanations. It's not a light reflection, it's not hysteria, it's not an artistic error. It's something that shouldn't be there, but is. And it's there with force, with presence. And if it bothers so much, maybe that's because it's the key to everything. In modern comparisons, this kind of object is described as a black craft, dark vessels that appear around conflict zones or even during covert military tests. In many contemporary cases, dark, lightless objects are reported as observers before or after more active sightings. What was seen in Nuremberg might have followed the same pattern, just 460 years before we had words for it. And here remains a question that echoes to this day. Did the black spear appear to end the event, or to ensure it would be seen? And if it's the latter, what did it want us to see? Whether as observer, symbol, or technology, the black spear remains the most disturbing element of that entire morning. Because it doesn't fight, it doesn't flee, it doesn't respond. It simply is, and perhaps still is to this day. Let's take a step back, not in time, but in perspective. Because until now, we've been looking at the Nuremberg event with today's eyes, searching for technology, patterns, possible contact. But what if back then, the goal wasn't to understand, but to control? What if what happened in the skies was immediately seized as an opportunity? Not by those who saw it, but by those who told what was seen. The 16th century was an ideological minefield. The Protestant Reformation had fractured Europe. The Church was losing influence, while new doctrines emerged on all sides. In that context, any sign in the sky was a chance to reinforce faith or fear. And fear, as we know, is one of the most efficient tools to tame a population. Glaser's pamphlet, although graphic and descriptive, ends with a moral exhortation. He doesn't just report what was seen. He warns. He calls for repentance. He mentions divine wrath. That doesn't sound like the natural conclusion of someone who witnessed unknown technology. It sounds like an adaptation of the mystery to the dominant discourse. An attempt to turn the incomprehensible into celestial punishment. Convenient, isn't it? And here comes the delicate point. What if part of the account was, in fact, shaped by religious interests? That doesn't diminish the power of the phenomenon, but it changes its utility. Because think with me, if you were a spiritual leader amid the doctrinal chaos of Europe, and the sky suddenly exploded into an unusual spectacle, would you let it pass as a scientific curiosity, or use it as a warning? Glaser may have tried to stay faithful to what people saw, but who distributed the pamphlets? Who controlled the oral narrative in churches, in town squares, in markets? This was 1561. People didn't read newspapers. They listened to sermons, and what they heard shaped what they felt. The event was turned into a call for fear, not understanding, not investigation, and that says a lot. Now, imagine how many other phenomena were absorbed in the same way. How many strange, unexplainable signs were swallowed by religious rhetoric as mere divine manifestations. The red cross in the sky, God. The clashing spheres, battle of angels. The black spear, judgment. Everything reinterpreted, repackaged, delivered to the people as a warning, not as a puzzle. But the danger in that is immense. Because when you turn the unknown into dogma, you kill curiosity. You block investigation. You establish that asking questions is disrespectful. And perhaps that's why Nuremberg didn't make it into history as it should have. Not because there were no witnesses, but because there was too much narrative control. This distortion is something that repeats throughout history. When the unexplainable appears, those who dominate public discourse always try to domesticate it, turn it into an ideological weapon. And sometimes it happens so fast that no one notices. The people accept, history absorbs, and the true meaning is lost. But what's most striking is that this strategy is still alive today. How many modern events, captured by radar, pilots, or cameras, are explained with pre-made phrases before any serious analysis even begins? Doesn't it seem that even now, they still try to decide for us what we're supposed to think? The difference is that now we have the means to go back, to review, to compare. And the Nuremberg case offers us exactly that, a chance to reopen a chapter of history. But this time without religious filters, without manipulation, without fear, just with the right question in mind. What if what happened there wasn't a divine warning, but a signal we failed to decipher in time? The Nuremberg event of 1561 remains a crack in the concrete of official history. It's not legend. It's not folklore. It's a printed record, visual, witnessed by dozens, maybe hundreds of people. A morning when the sky revealed something that could not be ignored, but was. And that erasure, slow and systematic, may say more than the phenomenon itself. Because when the unknown challenges beliefs, structures, and power, it is treated as a threat. And threats are silenced. Today, by revisiting this episode with distance, technology, and the courage to question the obvious, we realize that Nuremberg is not an anomaly. It's a reminder, a forgotten piece of a greater puzzle we still haven't been able to put together, and perhaps never will be allowed to fully see. This story is just one piece, and someday, maybe you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think too, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.